Today we are going to be starting the halachas of sefiras haomer. Sefiras haomer requires a massive introduction. There's a lot going on in sefiras haomer. We had one session thus far where we discussed in depth women counting. We already tackled that, or not counting with the bracha not. In depth, we discussed it. There's a major discussion and argument. Is sira an obligation from the Torah or from the rabbis? We have to see the halachic ramifications that will result from that argument. Svira, the Gemara in Menachos relates that there's a mitzvah to count the days and the weeks. So now the question that we have to ask ourselves is, let's say we only did one. Let's say we only counted the weeks or we only counted the days. Well, the weeks is obvious. How could you fulfill your obligation if you didn't count the days? We'll have to see if that's so simple, though. The question, right? The question is, let's say you just counted the days, but not the weeks. Would you still fulfill your obligation or not? Another major discussion in Sfira is how many mitzvahs is Sfira? Is it 49? Because 49 days? Is it 49 plus 1, like when you finish everything, you get another mitzvah? Is it 7 for the weeks? Is it just 1? It's all a package deal. So we have to discover that as well. We're going to discuss in the first sif is Sfira. Does it have to be done in Hebrew or could it be done in any language? Should it be done in other languages if you don't know Hebrew? We have to discuss as well by Sfira. Do you need to count yourself or could someone else count on your behalf?
How would that work?
It says, you have to count. The question is, could you listen to someone else and fulfill your obligation through the concept of Shemaya Ka'ona? Listening is like answering. Is that considered counting yourself? We have to discuss that as well. We have to discuss, do we need to stand when we say Sfira? Why or why not? So we have a lot of questions, as you could tell. A lot to discuss in Sfira. Another question is, every single time that we do a mitzvah that is new, that we don't always do, we always say the bracha of Shechianu. So why is there no bracha of Shechianu by Sfira? Another question that we have to address is, we're counting over here. What are we counting exactly? Right? We're counting, they would bring a korban omer after 49 days after the second day of Pesach. So we're counting, we're recalling that they used to have the korban omer then. Right? We're counting when we receive the Torah, it's Matan Torah. Right? So the question is, why specifically over here are we counting? And number one, why are we counting up as opposed to down? When you look forward to something, you're counting down, you say, oh, 48 days left, 47, 46. And furthermore, we have to address, there are many other areas in the Torah where counting is necessary, and yet we do not make an official count. For instance, when a woman becomes impure, whether for dam nida or a zava, in the time of in earlier times when the Beis Hamikdash was around, they would have a type of impurity called a zav or a zavah for a female. So they wouldn't say a bracha when they accounted for a zava for a nida. So a very interesting question, which many posts can deal with. Yaakov will see the Radbaz. Why don't you say a bracha for a nida? Why doesn't she say a bracha? Why specifically over here are we going to count? So what we see from everything that we just discussed in the last 5 minutes or so is that there are a lot of concepts to discuss. It should be noted that every single thing that I just threw out, all those questions obviously is based on hours of research. But additionally, it's only on the first sif of the simon. It has nothing to do with the other sif, and that's all on this one sif. If you look on the page in the Mishnah Berurah is over 2 pages on this first sif. So it's a very involved sif, and there's really a lot going on over here and a lot to discuss. Okay, so these are some questions that we're going to deal with on sif alpha. Additionally, should it be counted before Aleinu or after? We know it's at Mariv. The question is before Aleinu or after, and why? What is that based on? So in other words, in this first sif, there are a lot of topics that come up, and we're going to have to isolate each one independently and try to remember all of it. Okay. Any questions, comments before we begin? We're going to start with the opening Magen Avram, today's session. The Magen Avram actually addresses a question that we didn't address in this introduction. Believe it or not, we didn't cover everything. The Magen Avram comments on the first Shulchan Aruch. Belel Sheni says the Shulchan Aruch, Acher Tfilas Arvis Maschilun Lispor haomer. On the second night of Pesach, after Marav, we begin to count sefiras. We're going to learn about something else that we didn't discuss in this introduction, which is when do you count sefiras on the second night exactly? Should it be before the Seder? Should you stop in the middle of the Seder or after the Seder? We're going to see the different reasons behind that as well.
Or during the
Why
Seder.
you
Oh,
should
during
only
the
go
Seder.
one way and not the other way, which we'll see what that has to do with. But the Magen Avram over here is asking a very strong question. Let's see the Magen Avram inside, and then we'll speak it out outside as opposed to outside first and inside. Hiksha Kesef Mishnah. The Magen Avram opens up his commentary to the halachas of sefiras haomer by quoting a Kesef Mishnah in Perek Vav in Hilchos Sukkah on the Rambam Halacha Yud Gimel. And the Kesef Mishnah is Ha'eich mevarchin ala sfira b'yom tov sheni v'lo yichayishinan lezilusu d'yom tov. How are we able to recite a bracha on sfira on the second night of Yom Tov of Pesach, and we're not worried about belittling the holiday of Pesach? The whole mehai taimo loy mevarchin ala sukkah b'shmini. Because for this reason, we don't make a bracha on the sukkah on the eighth day. In other words, the Gemara discusses this. And at the end of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, the Gemara Shulchan Aruch says, Yesi Yasvinan Ruchi Lo Mevarchinan. We sit in the sukkah, but we don't say a bracha. Yeah. So the question is, why not? The answer is it's really Shmini Atzeres is a regular b'fnei atzmo. It's an independent holiday, right? And over there, we don't say a leishe b'sukkah because if we did, it would be tarti desatri. It would be a contradiction. That's why you don't say a bracha, because it's an independent holiday. Now you're saying leisha b'sukkah, you're calling it sukkahs. It's attached to sukkahs, but it's halachically an independent holiday. So how then could we recite a bracha on sefira, which seems like is knocking at the holiday of Pesach? Yishleimar, the Kesef Mishnah answers, the Hasam Oimer alakois is Yoim Shmini Atzeres Azeh. Right over there, you're saying this when you say Kiddush. It's actually not the Kiddush tune that I just did, but yeah, Halatun, Halatun. But over there, you say that it's Shmini Atzeres. V'im yevarach ala sukkah satri adadi. So now, if you're going to say a bracha on the sukkah, that's going to be a tart to satri. It's going to be a contradiction because you're simultaneously calling that day Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, which they're not. They cannot coexist. Masha'inkein, conversely over here, Khan over here, we don't say such a thing. When you count Sfira, you're not saying now it's a different holiday than Pesach. It's Pesach, you're also counting Sfira. You know me, an additional answer. Kevon de Anon Bakinon Bekvia de Yarcha. We're experts now with the calendar. We know exactly when each holiday is, as opposed to thousands of years ago, they would rely on the moon and discovering when the holidays would be. Consequently, in the letter of the law, one would not need to sit in a sukkah on the eighth day of sukkah because we know it is not sukkahs. There's no doubt. That's why you don't say a bracha. How could you say a bracha on something that you know you're not really supposed to be following through on? But over here, it's the opposite, the contrary. From the letter of the law, me'ikar hadin, you need to count, and therefore, that's why you make a bracha. So you make a bracha. So two answers of the Kesef Mishnah. Number one, there's no contradiction over here. Number two, we know for sure that you're supposed to be counting as opposed to Shmini Atzeres. We know that you really technically shouldn't be sitting in the sukkah. the continuation of the Magen Avram is something that we don't need to see because we already saw it on the session with women and Sfira. We already saw this part of the Magen Avram word for word, and we discussed this in depth, talking about the obligation of women. It's the opening Magen Avram of this simon. The Machasis HaShekel explains parts of this Magen Avram, even though we got a proper understanding already as is, but Magen Avram says, Havi tarti desatrum loimer biyoim shmini atzeres ulevarach leish v'sukkah. It's a contradiction to say it's the day of Shmini Atzeres, the eighth day, while simultaneously saying leish v'sukkah. It's a contradiction. Av shosh v'sukkah, even though we sit in the sukkah, nevertheless, mikol makom kivdein mevarachin leish v'sukkah loy mechsi kesatrum. If you're not saying an official bracha of leish v'sukkah, it doesn't look like a contradiction, even though you're sitting in the sukkah. Alakos. On one cup, you're saying two things. Zelazeh. Leisha Besukkah, Valoimer Shmini Atzeres. Saying Leisha Besukkah and Shmini Atzeres. Mashain King Gabe Sfira. Unlike Sfira. Shein has Sfira Semucha has Kodas Yom Tov. That the Sfira is not near mentioning Yom Tov as Siyas Kiddush and making Kiddush. So therefore, by Sfira, you're not mentioning it right by when you're mentioning the Yom Tov of Pesach, the holiday of Pesach, making Kiddush, therefore it would be fine.